Years out there, very, very lonely existence, pretty much by myself with my herds of goats. And often goats would take a run, and I ran after a little goat, and for some reason, I was very strong and very impetuous, and I'm now 20, and I kept running. I left the goat behind, I left the mountains behind, and I ran up over the mountains and dales. And I had a good sense of direction in the country. I stayed well away from Belfast or any small villages or groupings of houses. I kept well into the hills, went past a very large port, which I learned later was Dublin. I covered 200 miles. Of course I had to stop and fish, eat berries, sleep, but I made my way all the way to 200 miles down to a town of Wexford. At first, the sailor boys didn't want me on board, but there was something about my convincing them. They allowed me on board. I convinced them that I could be some asset, and we finally sailed for England. I was on my way home. Again, I got to England. I didn't trust anyone. Lots of Anglos and Saxons, Normans coming across, very violent times. I stayed to the hills, and I made my way home. By the time I got home, my mother had passed on, and my grandfather too, due to his age, and times were tough. I lived with my father for some time, and he recognized in me the scholarly side. He knew that I couldn't just be a farm boy. So he wrote a few letters, and before you knew it, the Pope had summoned me. It was Pope Constantine. With the fall of the Roman Empire, so the fall of the Roman Catholic religion. Constantine set up a beautiful city in Constantinople, and it became the beginning of the Byzantine era, and I was part of that. They sent me to school in monasteries in the south of France, and there I stayed, studying, doing the things I love most in a beautiful area of the Mediterranean. Mediterranean is a very interesting part of the world in those times. If anybody has ever studied or read anything about the Celtic, we know that the influence came from the Mediterranean. The Druids came from the Mediterranean. And there was something while I was sitting and working in a monastery, there was a calling. It was an unbelievable, deep calling that I had to go back to Ireland. So I gathered what I had. Being a monk in a monastery, I didn't have much but books. I took those with me and made my way to Ireland. I made the acquaintance of King Tara. He didn't think kindly to me. Actually, I was beaten, starved, chained, but my determination to answer the calling, the reason why I had come back there, he accepted me finally. And I was free to roam with the Druids and the Celts. We didn't build cathedrals, we didn't have big churches, not like the Holy Roman side of it, the beautiful architecture, no. We stayed in the groves, in the forest groves. We would just create, in the meadow, a place to gather for the people. And I learned that not only I had a calling, but the people of Ireland were calling for me. This was desperate, dark times. Without books, without literacy, we were plunged into the dark ages. There's not much written about this period of time. But with my books and my working with the Druids, Druid, by the way, is Latin for magic. I was often described as being a shaman or a magic man. And I did know a little bit about working with herbs and healing, but it was mostly of the body and the soul and the heart that I healed. I was free to roam all of Ireland and Scotland. We would gather at megaliths and just stand and feel the ancientness of the country in the standing stone circles. I worked with the Druids. I lived a very long life. I died in 497, almost 100 years old. Amazing for those times. And I am laid to rest in a place called Downpatrick, just south of Belfast. So through the mysteries and the histories of time and ages, the dark ages, you have met I, Patrick, Saint Patrick.